Hello everyone, it's Morris back here again. So today is another video talking about the runes, charms and cards of Axie Origins Season 2, and today we have Bird. So for Bird, the signature buff is Feather, and Feather does 1 bonus damage per hit. Whenever this Axie hits a target, increases this bonus by 1 damage. When this Axie has no feather, the bonus damage is reset. When your turn ends, if this Axie used an attack card, it loses 1 feather, and you have the maximum of 10 stacks for feather. And I think this buff, I don't think it matters how many stacks of feather you have, you'll still have just 1 bonus damage per hit. So even if you have like 5 feathers, you'll still have 1 bonus damage per hit, but then the counter increases every time this Axie hits a target. And the reason why you want to have like say 10 stacks is mostly just because you don't want to lose the stack, so that then your bonus damage will be reset. And that's how I assume it works. Do note that yeah, so when your turn ends, if this actually uses an attack card, it loses 1 feather, right? So I think having multiple feather is really just so that the bonus damage won't get reset. Okay, so let's get into the runes. So first off, Way of Bird, and again a one-off kind of self buff. In this case, when the battle starts, this actually gains 2 feather. Okay, so giving you 2 feather is not too bad, I would say. Okay, so it basically gives you something to start, right? So you already start with the feather as opposed to needing to get it somewhere. So I think this is actually quite a good buff as compared to the other ones, because as long as you have 1 feather, then I think this bonus damage already starts to add up. Okay, let's say if you hit 6 times, then you basically will deal 6 bonus damage after the 6th time, I would assume. And if you do 6 hit with feather, then you already have a total bonus damage of 21. And it obviously adds up if you manage to keep your feather, and I quite like it. It's really about keeping your feather buff so that you never lose it. If you lose it, then the bonus reset. If you don't lose it, let's say if you do actually 20 hits, and it might sound crazy, oh wow, 20 hits is hard to get, but actually in Birds you'll see there are a lot of multi-attack cards, and I would assume each of the multi-attack hits will be like counts as an individual hit, but I have to be confirmed. Anyway, so if you do 20 hits, then basically it deals the total bonus damage of 210, which I think can add up. For Way of Bird, there's also a passive attack buff as well, which shows that Bird is really more about attacking and hence the bonus damage. So in this case, this Axie's attack card deals 10 bonus damage as well. So actually not a bad kind of starter rune, I would say, for a rare rune. Okay, next we have Energy Guru. So for Energy Guru, what it says is that when your turn starts, during even rounds, gain 1 energy fragment. Whenever this Axie attacks, deal 4 damage per energy cost to all enemy Axies. So let's just break it down. So the first part is basically ramp. So every other rounds you gain energy fragment, which is not that much, but it could add up. And whenever this Axie attacks, deal 4 damage per energy cost to all enemy Axies. So it's keeping kind of the original Energy Guru kind of thing. Originally it has 6, now it does 4, which is still good, but note that it's only enemy Axie, so it doesn't deal with summons anymore. So we used to use Energy Guru to deal with summons, but now we can't. So it's basically giving you 12 damage per energy in the form of AoE, so I think it's still not too bad, right? And whenever the Axie attacks, then it deals 12 damage. So it's a 12 damage attack buff in a way. Okay, next up we have Sharp Talon, and it's a pretty simple one. It just says this actually deals 20% more damage against enemies that have no shield. So basically very good against things like Penguin Scale Beast, but also just in general, if aggro team that doesn't play any shield, then this is a very strong attack buff. But the downside is that it's really very matchup dependent. Let's say if you go against a Stain or Poison or just other teams that has shield, then this basically does nothing. Unless of course you maybe use other Axie's card to just break the shield first, and then this will get the bonus. That's why I guess it's a rare rune, so it's kind of useful in some very niche cases, but otherwise yeah, I think it can be quite a good so-called tech rune, especially in tournament setting where you kind of know or can predict what your opponent is going to bring. And if, let's say, like, you know that the opponent doesn't really have much shield, then you might actually want to put this in. Okay, next let's look at the epic and mystic charms, and as usual it's all solo, meaning only one Axie can have each of the runes, so you can have multiple copy of the rune in your team. And the first one is Raven's Tactic. Okay, so Raven's Tactic is no change really, I guess, except for solo. And it says this Axie deals 20% bonus damage if its HP is above 50%, and this Axie takes 20% less damage if its HP is below 50%. So basically, if you are high health, then you deal more damage, whereas if you're low health, then you mitigate damage instead. Yeah, so I would say nothing much to say for this one. I think a pretty strong rune. Well, opponent will play around it, that's what I would say, but still, I think early game 20% bonus, pretty good, and also late game can also tank a few hits, so I think overall not bad. Okay, next we have Sacred Feather, and this one is very interesting. Never thought that bird actually has some defensive kind of rune, and I quite like the design of it as well because, okay, it says once per battle, if this Axie would die, it survives with 1 HP. So basically it's like a phoenix kind of effect, right? So it kind of comes back alive, and then I think the interesting part is that then healed for 5% of its max HP for each of its feather. Afterwards, deal 20 damage to all enemies. So there are actually quite a lot going on. First of all, it allows you to survive 1 hit. Okay, secondly, it heals you, and thirdly, it deals 20 AoE damage. So basically, the opponent has to hit into it an extra time. So that's already can be pretty good, especially against single attack kind of team. And it at least will do 60 damage as well. Assuming that the opponent has 3 Axies, then yeah, it will do 20 damage to all, so total of 60 AoE damage, so that's not too bad. And I think the heal is really the one that really I like, right? Because let's assume you can actually get this Axie to 10 stacks of feather, which is what you want to do for birds anyway, right? You want to just stack up all the feathers and keep the feathers, and if you have 10 stacks, it basically heal you back to half health, and that's just crazy. So yeah, I definitely would want to see how this is played, even though, you know, in terms of power level, it doesn't really give you passive buff, but I do feel like effectively it gives you kind of like a extra, hopefully 50% HP, so that could be like 200 HP to work with. Even if you only have 5 stat, it gives you 100 HP, which is still pretty good, I would say. Next, we have Feather Descent, which is the Mystic rune, and now it's changed to when your turn starts, this Axie gains 1 feather. Okay, so it will already give you feather, so that's one good thing about it. Whereas Sacred Feather, you have to get feather in some other way. So for Feather Descent, it will already give you the feather. And at 10 stacks, add Feather Dagger to your hand until it's full. So I think for Axie, the full hand is basically 10 cards. So let's say if you draw 5 cards, it will give you 5 Feather Dagger. And what Feather Dagger is that it's a card that's 0 cost, does 5 damage. So yeah, I think, and it can be retained as well. So it's basically like a free 25 damage kind of thing. Now, of course, it uses 5 feather, but still, I mean, as long as you have 1 feather, your bonus buff will still be there. But I must say, I still feel it's a bit weak. I do like the first part, so where it really allows you to keep the feather and get the feather stack up, so that you don't actually have a net loss of feather even if you use attack cards. But still, the rest of the effect is actually not too strong. So I think this card is really only good if you are really abusing the feather mechanic, which of course is what this rune does, right? Feather Descent. Be interested to see how good it actually is. Okay, then let's look at the charms, and for birds, it's mostly about multi-hit and AoE attack card, and also a bit about single attack card, but you can see that it actually buffs the multi-attack card and AoE quite a bit more, and actually doesn't buff the single attack card as much, let's say compared to Aqua and Beast. But yeah, so I would say mostly more about multi-hit and AoE attack. And let's look at the 4 interesting rune on the right. So first one, Secret 8, now what it does is that it can be put on any card, and it says on draw deals 3 damage to all enemy. So effectively, when you draw, you can think of it as drawing this, deal 9 total damage, assuming that the opponent has 3 Axies. So yes, okay, I would say, but not too strong. Next, Feather Fan. I think Feather Fan is really the strong one. So it basically allows you to get Feather on other Axies as well. And of course, you know how strong having Feather is and keeping the Feather stacks so that the bonus damage will keep stacking up. So yeah, I think the important part is that it actually gains 2 Feather. So that just means that it can actually kind of last for 2 turns. So yeah, I can see a team where it's just running a lot of Feather Fan and then keeping the Feather stack and then just dealing a lot of bonus damage. And do note that for Feather, for bonus damage especially, it goes very well with things like AoE attack and multi-hit because it just scales a lot better. Oh, forgot to mention, for Feather Fan it can only be put on attack card, but still I think if you want to run Bird, usually you will probably play quite a lot of attack cards anyway, and most of the Bird's cards are attack card. Okay, next we have Bird Energy Drink S, and it can be put on any card, so that's why I put a non-attack card there as well. And it says this Axie gains 2 feather, so basically every time you play that card with the charm on, then you'll gain 2 feather, which is pretty good. So there's actually one 0 cost card that you can put on that's not banished or anything, so Cloud, which can target any ally and gains 2 feather. So you basically can put 2 feather on that ally, and then the Axie that plays this card can also gain 2 feather, so that's not too bad. 0 energy gaining 4 feather. But of course there's this downside, which is the grade, and what the grade does is that when your turn ends, if this card is still in your hand, instead of being discarded, this card is exiled and a confused card is shuffled into your discard pile. So basically if you don't play this card while this is in your hand, then this card is kind of gone, so that's the downside. But if you put it on a 0 cost card, then usually you will probably just play it anyway, so there's no downside to it. But of course you can also put it on other attack cards as well. So I think there's really quite a lot of feather thing going on with Bird, when I look forward to seeing how feather pans out. Okay, finally we have Flamingo Hammer for the Mystic Charm, and now what it does is that you can put it on an attack card, and it says deal 10% bonus damage against enemies affected by weak. Attacks apply weak for 2 turns. So first is about the bonus damage, but of course if the opponent doesn't have weak, then you don't get that bonus damage. But regardless of whether the opponent has weak or not, the attack will still apply weak for 2 turns after the attack is dealt. So what weak means is actually that the target deals 20% less attack damage, and so it basically is like a debuff on the opponent so that they will hit less hard. So interesting that I give it to Bird, and there's quite a bit of weak synergy as well, so it allows Bird to kind of survive for a bit longer through debuffing on the opponent. Okay, let's get into the cards, and first up we have Ice, and as usual we start off with a 0 energy cost card, and in this case it's Lucas, and what it does is that if initial, so if it's the first card that you play in the turn, then select 1 Bird card from your discard pile, otherwise select from your draw pile. So you select 1 card and put that card on top of your draw pile, then banish. So basically you can choose a Bird card and then put it on the top of your draw pile so that next turn you draw it. And note that it's banished, meaning this card will disappear or will be in the banish pile after you use it, so usually you will probably only be able to use this card once per game. Okay, next we have Mavis. Okay, and this one quite a bit of change, and there's a 1 cost summon and has now 24 HP as for other so-called, I guess, low HP summons. And now what it says is that when your turn starts, gain 1 energy fragment. When your turn ends, your opponent loses 1 energy fragment, and Mavis loses 8 HP. So without any healing or anything, assuming the Mavis actually survives for 3 rounds, then it actually gives you a 6 energy fragment swing, which can be very annoying, to be honest, especially coupling with other kind of energy fragment swing, kind of either charm or cards or anything, just because it really gives you an advantage So it's very annoying for the opponent because you basically slow down the opponent in getting extra energy while you are progressing into getting more energy. So you can get to a point where you're keeping your opponent at 3 energy while you are at 4 energy for multiple turns. So yeah, I think it could be interesting, but of course if you get sniped, then basically the only effect is that your opponent loses 1 energy, and that's basically it. But of course every time you play summon, there's that risk, especially against AoE as well. Okay, next, Robin. And Robin is another summon, in this case also 24 HP. And what it does is that upon dying, deal 4 damage to all enemies. So basically when it dies, it deals AoE, and that's basically what it does. But you can think of it as like a timed bomb, and you can kind of charge it. It's because what it is after the turn summon, so not during the turn summon, it's afterwards. Whenever an ally does a direct hit, increase the damage by 4. And I assume that would mean that every multi-hit attack would be like a direct hit would be like, let's say if you have an attack that deals 3 hits, then I assume that this means 3 direct hit. Not too sure, need to confirm, but regardless, you can basically stack this up to a maximum of 100 damage, which of course is very hard to get because you will need 24 hits, which to be honest for burst might actually get there, or at least get somewhere close. But let's assume that you just do 3 hit. So basically assuming that it survives for 1 turn, then it will do 16 damage across the board, so it's 48 total damage if there's 3 Axies on the opponent's side. At the base level, it does 12 damage in total, which is pretty bad, right? If you get sniped off, it's just bad, as you would expect for any summons. But then if it survives for 1 turn, 48 is still not good. But of course, in this case, it's really a high risk, high reward kind of card. If it actually survives and you manage to do 20 hits, then you can get to somewhere close to 100 AoE damage, which could be like 300 damage in total. So that is basically the reward by playing Robin. Okay, next we have Little Owl, and there are actually 3 Little Owls card. So one is eye, and the other is ear, and the last one is mouth. So all 3 has the same text, and it says deal 2 hits. So it's a 1 cost 20 attack cards, and it deals 2 hits. So at the base level, it basically deals 40 damage, which is of course not very exciting. But it does say, whenever played, this Axie's Little Owl cards gain 1 bonus hit for the rest of the battle. So basically what you want to do is to run multiple Little Owl on that one particular Axie, so it only has to be that one Axie. So if you play Little Owl from another Axie, it won't add to it. So it's only that Axie, but still you can run 3 copies maximum. Then every time you use Little Owl from that Axie, it adds another hit. That means add another 20 damage. Of course, it scales very well with the damage kind of buff like feather, and even just like the charm, like multi-attack charm, because it adds to the base damage. And so if it deals 3 hits, then basically the base damage is added by 3 times, right? And it deals 4 hits, then the base bonus damage will be added by 4 times. Of course, there's a bit of a cap, and the cap is 4 bonus hits, so meaning the maximum is 6 hits, which is 120 damage for 1 energy, which will be very strong. So you can see how this is a very simple kind of addition, right? The first Little Owl you play, you do 40 damage, and the second you do 60, third you do 80, fourth you do 100, and then the fifth and beyond you do 120. And so if you kind of calculate per energy cost, of course the first one is going to be a bit like underwhelming. If you play 2 Little Owl, it kind of evens out to 50 damage per energy, still not great. But once you get to 3, then it's 60 damage per energy, which is not too bad. But of course when you get to 4 Little Owl played, then it's 70 damage per energy. 5, then it's 80. 6 Little Owl play is around 86, it's because it's already capped at 120, you can't get more. But still, you still deal 120 damage for 1 energy cost, it's still gonna be pretty good. So yeah, so you definitely want to play Little Owl as many times as you can. Next we have Ear. First one we have Pink Cheek. It's a skill card, 0 cost, and it says draw 2 cards, then discard 2 from your hand, unstable. So I would say it's pretty good in terms of just ensuring your card consistency. So it allows you to draw 2 extra cards and then you discard 2. And you definitely want to play it during a turn where you have some weak draws and you happen to draw into this. But of course the downside is actually that it has unstable, meaning once you actually play this card, then this card will disappear, so you only get to play it once, and it actually shuffle a confused card into your discard pile, and so it will actually hurt your future draw. So it basically is like a enjoy first and then suffer later kind of card. Next we have Early Bird, and now you can see there are a lot of cards that's changed to deal 2 hits, which of course fits the theme of Bird these days, where it's mostly about multi-hit kind of card. Power level is still the same as before, so now it's 30 base damage and it deals 2 hits, so the base level is 60 damage per energy. Of course it scales better with damage buff like Feather, and it says limits 3, I think. So basically all those draw 1 card kind of card, you can play only 3 per turn, and I think that's what it means. Okay, then next we have Little Owl, which we already talked about, and do note that something I forgot to mention is that it says deal 2 hits, and that just means it actually hits the same target, right? So it's not like randomly deals 2 hits. So meaning, let's say if the opponent only has like 20 health, then you basically wasting your second hit just because it will just deal the hit to that particular Axie, if I understand it correctly. Yeah, so it's definitely not like a randomly deal 2 hits kind of thing. Yeah, so do take note of those, especially for quite a lot of the changed new bird cards. Okay, next we have Peacemaker. So Peacemaker is a 1 energy 60 attack card, and it says if the target has weak, deal 20 bonus damage, otherwise apply weak for 4 turns. So there's this weak synergy here, which I must say previous season hasn't been working out. It's pretty hard to get like a weak package together, but weak itself is not bad, right? Target deals 20% less damage, so definitely good against aggro. And of course, if you have the synergy, then it does 80 damage per energy, which is not bad, but still not like game breaking, so it's like, okay. Right, next again is a 1 cost 60 attack card. It's Curly, and this time it's more of a fragile synergy. So it says if the target has fragile, deals 20 bonus damage, otherwise apply fragile for 4 turns. So do note that, yeah, it's same as the previous card, also is otherwise. So if the target already has fragile, it doesn't apply fragile, it doesn't add to the counter of the debuff. So what fragile means is that fragile is a debuff, applies to the enemy, where it says this unit gains 40% less shield from abilities. So basically good against team that relies on shield. And again, maximum damage is 80 damage per energy, which is okay, but you know, again, not that great. I wish that they actually give it more so that people actually like build a team around a particular kind of debuff, but in this case it's just like okay, there's a bit more, but that's it. Okay, next we have Risky Bird. Okay, so it's a 1 cost 70 damage card, so in this case already a pretty good base level, I would say. And also it has if initial, so if you play at the first card of your turn, then it deals 15 bonus damage and apply bleed to self for 3 turns. So that means it will basically deal 85 damage, which is not bad if you want to pick up some KOs. But there's the downside is that you apply bleed for yourself, and bleed means the target loses 15 HP when playing a card, and so you don't really want to play a card after this, just because then you will take damage. But of course, if it's like an aggro versus aggro and you do want to just pick out a knockout, then this is probably worth playing. I do know that it's 3 turns, meaning it's not just the current turn but also the round after that as well, so it's actually quite a long debuff, I feel. Okay, next we have Mouth, and first one, Double Talk, and it's now again a 2 hits, but this time around it's a randomly deal 2 hits kind of card, so which actually makes it pretty strong. And it's 1 cost 30 base damage, deals 2 hits, so it's 60 damage basically. But it says shuffle 1 Jinx into your opponent's discard pile per unique enemy hit, so then that's why randomly deal 2 hits is good, because quite a lot of the time you probably do 2 hits if the opponent has 3 Axies or even have like summons. And of course, if you hit 2 separate targets, then you shuffle 2 Jinx into opponent's deck, which is very strong, because 2 Jinx means 20 extra damage, because what Jinx is that it's a curse card, and it says whenever this card is drawn, your furthest Axie receives 10 damage plus 5 more damage per bad luck stack. Apply 1 bad luck to that Axie. So Yeah, I think this will definitely fit well in like those Jinx synergy kind of deck. And even without, I still think it can be a very strong card just because it shuffles 2 curse cards in your opponent's deck, and that basically means it disrupts their draw by 2 cards, which can be very strong. Next, we have Peacemaker again. So there are actually 2 different Peacemaker. You saw one before already, and so basically it has the same effect. So in a way, it gives you more ways in which you can apply weak. So yeah, so that's basically what it is. So sometimes you might want to have an Axie with 2 Peacemakers so that you get weak more consistently on the opponent's Axie. And next we have Hungry Bird, a 1 cost 60 attack card, and it says if initial, steal 20 HP. So that is, I feel like, very strong, because steal means deal pure damage and gain HP. So meaning you deal 20 extra damage and also you heal for 20. Okay, so effectively you do 80 damage per energy plus the 20 heal is basically 100 effect per energy kind of card. So that's why I think it is a very strong card. Sure, it has a downside, and it says apply heal block to self for 2 turns. So if you do use the steal effect, then you do apply heal block after you gain the HP. But still, usually you run it in a kind of aggro build that doesn't have any healing anyway, so it kind of doesn't have much downside. Okay, and finally, Little Owl. So I already talked about this one. So I think triple Little Owl could be pretty strong. Okay, next up we have Back. And for Back, first one is Balloon. 1 energy cost, 60 attack. And it says if the target has any shield, apply Hex for 4 turns. Otherwise, apply Fear for 4 turns. So let's talk about what Hex is first. So Hex is whenever the target uses a non-attack card, shuffle a Confused into its draw pile. Usually if the opponent has shield, then that just means they're probably running some sort of shield kind of team, and so they probably will have quite a lot of non-attack card. So Hex is actually quite annoying for opponent, where if they play any non-attack card, then they shuffle Confused into the draw pile. So it basically disrupts their draw if they choose to play a non-attack card. Okay, and then otherwise apply Fear for 4 turns. So basically if the opponent doesn't have shield, then apply Fear. And Fear, what it means is that it's a debuff, and it says whenever this unit uses an attack card, shuffle a Confused card into its draw pile. So in this case it's attack card, and usually opponents that doesn't have shield are aggro, meaning they are mostly having attack cards, and so it basically incentivize the opponent to not play attack card, because otherwise they'll shuffle Confused card into their deck. So I think it can be strong, especially in a one-on-one situation, but of course the opponent can also play around it as well. So yeah, so it's okay. On its own it's not too strong, but of course if you play a lot of cards and even runes that applies Hex and Fear on the opponent, then that could be pretty strong. Okay, next we have Cupid. So it's a randomly do 2 hits kind of card, 1 energy, 30 base damage, so in total 60 damage per energy. And it says apply weak for 2 turns, and in this case note that it's randomly deal 2 hits and each hit will apply weak, and so you can actually apply weak for 2 turns for 2 opponents in this case if it hits 2 opponents. So I think it could go quite well with the weak synergy, and I think you can see in Birds there are quite a lot of weak synergy cards. Next we have Raven, which is a 1 energy cost 60 attack card. Target the closest and furthest enemy, which I must say is interesting just because I thought it's more like an Aqua thing, but in this case Bird also get a card that does that, and also shuffle 1 Jinx into your opponent's discard pile. Again, I thought Jinx is more of an Aqua thing, but I guess Bird also have that as well. And so basically you can of course make some Aqua and Birds card to make a lot of Jinx synergy in this case. Again, you shuffle Jinx into opponent, and so at least it will do 10 extra damage when the opponent draws Jinx. Okay, next we have Pigeon Pose. 1 energy cost 55 damage, so you can see it's not very strong at the base level, but of course that just means the card text it could be strong, so that it balances out, right? So in this case the card text says add 1 blackmail to the opponent's hand, which actually can be very annoying. So blackmail, what it does is that it's a card that you put into your opponent's hand after you play Pigeon Pose. So it's a card, and whenever the opponent chooses to play that card, then it applies taunt to the furthest ally for 2 turns. If this is not used, put it onto the top of the draw pile. and banish. So basically, let's say you play Pigeon Post, you put a black mail into your opponent's hand, then once you end your turn, then at the beginning of the opponent's turn, the black mail will be put on top of the opponent's draw pile. So effectively, opponent will draw into black mail and draw one fewer fresh card. And if the opponent doesn't want to play it, the effects will continue, and so they'll keep getting into the black mail, which can be pretty annoying. So usually opponent will want to play it, but of course once the opponent plays black mail, then it applies taunt to their furthest Axie, and so now you can then backdoor them by hitting their furthest Axie. So it is quite an interesting kind of dynamic. But usually in previous season, we've seen like triple Pigeon Post where you put 3 black mail into your opponent's hand, and of course it just disrupt and draw in the next turn, which can be pretty strong if everything lines up. Okay, next we have Kingfisher, 1 energy, secret, no shield, and it says target any ally, limit 1 also, so I can only play 1 of this kind of card. The second one you play doesn't have any effect. And then what this card does is that next time the target gets attacked, deal 85 damage to the attacker, which I think is really not that good. It's a delayed kind of attack, so in the ideal case, of course, you deal 85 damage to the opponent using 1 energy, which is not bad, but of course there are some secret removing kind of card, or kind of, I'm not sure if the spell actually does that as well. Of course, if you're playing against like sustain or poison where the opponent doesn't really hit into you, then it also does nothing basically. So I don't think this kind of card is gonna get played unless I'm missing something. Okay, finally for back we have Tri-Feather, and so now it's 1 energy 20 base level, but it's not an AoE, it's a multi-hit card, randomly deal 3 hits now, and all ally Axies gain 1 feather per unique enemy hit. So assuming the Tri-Feather deals 3 hits to separate opponents, or 3 different opponents, then you get basically 3 feathers for all your Axies, and so effectively it can gain 9 feathers. So I would say definitely very strong for a feather based kind of build, and you just want to keep your feather stack up. But of course the downside is that it's 60 damage, but of course it does scale pretty well with damage kind of buff like feather, so I think it definitely will see play in bursts that plays feather. Okay, next we have Horn, and for Horn, first up we have Eggshell, and now what it is a 1 energy base level 35 attack card, and it says deal 2 hits, so effectively it's a 70 damage card. And note that it's not randomly deal 2 hits, so it will hit the same target, it just deals 2 hits. And apply Eggshell to sell for 4 turns, and Eggshell is a new buff. And it says at the end of your turn, all ally summons gain 25 shield. So it's really more of like a summon kind of synergy. So it protects your summon. I would say especially Mavis and also Robin as well. So I think it could be good if you play summons. But otherwise, it's still a 70 damage card. So it's still not bad, I would say, on its own. Okay, and next we have Cuckoo. Cuckoo is a 1 energy skill card. Can target any ally and applies the Cuckoo buff. And what Cuckoo is actually quite complex. So what Cuckoo is that it says either the next time sleep is applied to the Axie, prevent it. So it's like a either or kind of card. So if sleep is applied, then this card says prevent the sleep, which basically means you use 1 energy to prevent the sleep, which to be honest is not too good. But at least they give them or. So or this Axie's next single attack deals 65 bonus damage. So if you don't get to sleep, then you can kind of actually save up this buff in terms of damage buff in a way. Then basically it's like a 1 energy 65 damage, but then you kind of bank that damage for later, which I must say is usually not the best idea because the opponent can always just remove your buff. But it does synergize well with some cards that, let's say, heals you depending on the damage, and so that 65 bonus damage will add into it as well, so you get to heal a bit more, so that could be pretty good. Okay, next we have Trump, and it's a 1 energy cost card, 25 base attack, and it says randomly deal 3 hits. So now it's pretty simple. This is a 75 damage per energy card. pretty good, and it can also snipe off summons as well because it's 25 and it basically hits the 24 HP summons pretty well. So I think, yeah, not a bad card, just a strong card on its own, especially also scale well with the multi-hit kind of attack damage. Okay, next we have Kestrel. So now Kestrel, so it's a 1 energy 30 attack kind of card, and it says dispel 1 time, so of course the base level pretty weak, 30 damage, dispel 1 time, but it says for every 3 other cards in your hand, deal 1 bonus hit and dispel 1 more time, and I think this is pretty strong. Do note that it doesn't say randomly hits, so meaning it will always hit into the same target, but you can dispel multiple times, and I think that could be pretty strong, because at the base level you usually have at least 4 other cards in your hand because you draw 5 cards per turn, at least in the beginning, and so I feel like this is at least a 1 energy cost 60 attack card, and it's basically deal 2 hit, so it also scales well with damage buff, and also dispel 2 times. Where dispel means remove 1 random buff from target up to 3 stacks or 3 turns. So usually, let's say if the opponent has like 5 stacks, then if you just dispel once, you only remove 3 stacks, but if you dispel twice, then you can basically remove 6 stacks and 6 turns, which I feel like is quite a bit stronger. And also it synergizes well with things like retain or cards that gives you extra cards in your hand, like watering can, that kind of thing, because then if you actually have 9 other cards in your hand, then this actually deals 120 damage, which is a very strong card. So I do see that some people might try to make Kestrel work by having ways of generating a lot of cards and keeping them in your hand. And okay, next up we have Winghorn. Winghorn is a 2 energy cost, 40 attack card, and it deals 3 hits. So base level is 120 damage, so it's like a 60 damage per energy kind of card. Not that strong, but it does say whenever Winghorn kills a target or hits a target with less than 60 HP. So basically it says whenever it hits a target with less than 60 HP, or it hits summons as well, so if it just one shot a summon or something, then add 2 Feather Dagger to your hand. So I think it's pretty good late game. But having said that, getting Feather Dagger, like 2 of them is 10 damage, is still not that big of a deal. Okay, sure, like of course the best scenario is that you get 6 Feather Dagger because you randomly deal 3 hits, and if all the opponents has less than 60% HP, then you do get 6 Feather Dagger, and that's like 30 damage, and it basically then makes it a 150 damage card, but still it only makes it like a 75 damage per energy, so not that strong, especially if it's in the same slot as Kestrel, because Kestrel needs a lot of cards, and Feather Dagger is one of those cards that you can retain, but of course both being Horn, then you can't run both. Maybe you'll run Kestrel in one Axie and then run Winghorn in another Axie or something. Okay, finally for Horn we have Feather Spear, and there are actually 3 different types of spears. So there's Feather Spear, but there's also Scaly Spear and Bamboo Spear in different classes. So what this spear does is that it's a 1 energy cost, 30 base attack, and deals 2 hits, so again hitting the same target, and basically it deals 60 base damage. But of course the interesting thing about spears is that in this case it says this Axie gains 2 feather. Gain 1 bonus feather for each other spear card in your deck. And this one I quite like is because the base level already gives you 2 feather, which is not bad. And that just means you don't have to run it in like a spear kind of deck. Of course if you have spears, let's say if you have 3 different spears, then you do get 4 feather, which is pretty good. But to be honest, 2 is also not bad already. That's how I feel. So you don't have to actually run it in a spear kind of team. Okay, and finally we have Tail. So for Tail, first one is Swallow. It's a 1 energy 65 attack card. Base level already pretty good. So it says if initial, lose 20 HP and destroy up to 120 shield of the target before dealing damage. Well, this is very strong, and that's why I used to play this a bit as well. Especially very strong against shield kind of build, because effectively you're dealing 120 extra damage. Sure, you kind of lose 20 HP, but you do remove 120 shield, which I think is very strong. Base level 65, you lose 20 HP, but if you destroy 120 shield, the net effect is 165 net effect per energy, and that is very strong. Of course, it's not going to be good against every matchup, especially those that doesn't play shield, then it's just a 65 attack card, which I would say is still not bad, but I think it could still be worth running one copy in your team, so that like if you run into deck that has shield, then this could actually go through shield pretty well. Having said that though, you don't get to see where the opponent's shield goes most of the time because they're secret, and so sometimes you might actually not hit the right target. But still, I think it's pretty strong. Next we have Feather Fan, and it's a 2 energy cost, 25 base power, but it says deal 4 hits, so effectively it does 100 damage, which is still not very good because at the base level 2 energy deals 100 damage. Note that it's not randomly deal 4 damage, it's just deal 4 hits, meaning it will have to hit the same opponent, and it basically gives you 50 damage per energy, which is not good. But of course there's more to it than that, and it says consume up to 3 feather, which I must say is actually quite a lot to consume, and it deals 1 bonus hit per feather consumed. And I feel like it's actually, I don't know if it's worth it. So first of all, it's assuming you have 3 feathers, it will consume all 3, and it will do basically 7 hits, and that's 175 damage. So of course I'm just counting as 25 in terms of base damage, and of course you can buff it through your charm and also with the damage buff, and of course assuming that each hit adds to the damage buff of feather, then it could be pretty strong, but it takes away 3 feather, so you do have to run a lot of feather gain kind of effects in order for it to work, because otherwise you might happen to lose all your feather and you might not have enough ways to gain feather, then this will be pretty bad. But still, at the base level, if you have a maximum 7 hits, it deals 175 damage, which is like 87.5 damage per energy. I feel like it's still not very broken as compared to, let's say, Leafy or like Tri-Spike from other classes. So yeah, not really liking this one that much, but maybe I'm wrong. Next we have the last one. It's a 1 energy cost, 65 damage attack card, and it says if this is the only attack card in your hand, deal 25 bonus damage. I think, yeah, not bad, pretty strong. 65 base is okay, but of course the high roll is that you play as the last attack card, then you do get to deal 90 damage per energy, which is pretty good. So next we have Cloud, and it's a 0 cost skill card, and it says target any ally, gain 2 feather. So pretty simple. Actually goes well, as I mentioned, with the Bird Energy Drink S, because then it also gains 2 more feather. You can target an ally and give the ally 2 feather, and then the Axie that uses this card also gains 2 feather, so yeah, not too bad. Next we have Grammar's Fan, and it's a 1 energy cost, 20 base damage, and it's an AoE, attacks all enemy. And now what it does is that it says all ally Axie gain 2 feathers. So I think this one is probably one of the best feather kind of card that ensures that your Axie still has feather, because it basically applies to all ally Axie and it gives you 2. The downside of course is that the base level is really just 60 damage, but it's an AoE, so it actually scales pretty well with the damage buff. And finally we have Post Fight, and it's a 1 energy cost, 90 attack card. Base level of course is strong, but it does say this actually loses 20 HP, so it's really just a hyper aggro kind of card. So you do 90 damage but you lose 20 HP, so in a way it's like a 70 net effect per energy. But of course you mostly care about the damage, and being an aggro team, then you don't really care too much about the losses in HP. You run it in some sort of build that be able to heal, and maybe that 20 HP doesn't matter as much. Yeah, but still I don't think it's that strong compared to other tail card. Okay, so that is it for Bird. Thank you very much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed the video, and do stay tuned for the other videos about the runes, charms, and card of Axie Infinity Origins Season 2 for other classes. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.